exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
You show us everything you got, you keep on dancing, and the room gets hot. You drive us wild and we'll drive you crazy. I want to rock and roll all night and party every boom, boom, boom.
Tim, it sounds like you're trying out for Kiss's final tour.
Well, I was there when they started out along with my favorite glam band, the New York Dolls.
Yeah, well, I see that you're slinging a guitar. I didn't know that you played.
Well, my nickname at Max's Kansas City was Mr. Glam. You know, I was even on Edgar Winter's Frankenstein album, which went platinum. You could hear me on there. You could hear me on there clinking a set of keys. There's a song called "We All Had a Really Good Time," and the record companies put us in the recording studio. I think Bette Midler was there, and a couple of the Chambers brothers and Rick Derringer bought us a couple of high alcohol bottles of vodka, got us a little tipsy, and so we all had a really good time. And that's the background to the song that's on the Frankenstein album.
Well, you know, I'm more of a punk rocker, you know, a fan of Helen Wheels and the Ramones. But, you know, I think that we've got quite a show lined up tonight with some fantastic guests.
Oh, absolutely, man. You know, I can't wait to get to the nitty gritty of this. You know, I like I say, I was Mr. Glam, Mr. Glitter. I even had a shirt that was all glitter lame and all of that, you know, and I hung out at all the right places with all the wrong people. We had bands outside of the New York Dolls like Teenage Lust, the Magic Tramps, the Harlots of 42nd Street, Ruby and the Rednecks. But of course, right there at the top was the New York Dolls. They got the glam going. Mm-hmm. And so, Tim, without further ado, why don't you tell us who we're going to have on tonight? Because I'm excited. I'm putting on my platform shoes and teasing my hair and even putting a little lipstick on just for the occasion.
Oh, wow. I can't wait to see that, Tim.
Well, maybe we'll dig out. My friend Jeff has some old photographs we could find and dig them out there, you know.
Oh, I'd definitely like to see that. Well, Tim, you know, we've got two great guests tonight. We have on Barbara Kane and Peter Robbins. Now, Barbara is the wife of the late Arthur Killer Kane, who is the bassist with the bassist with the group the New York Dolls. Now, the two were married for 30 years before Arthur's death from leukemia in 2004. Now, at the age of 15, Barbara started singing with her own band, which was Bo Diddley's backup band when he played in New England. I guess that Bo Diddley had backup bands in like every section of the country.
Bo Diddley, where you been? Hand jive, talking about that crazy hand jive.
Now, Barbara was formally introduced to Arthur by her friend Stefan in 1974 at the Starwood nightclub in West Hollywood. Now, at that time, Kane was playing bass for the New York Dolls, along with guitarist Johnny Thunders, drummer Billy, how do you pronounce that name, Tim? Is it Mercia? I'm not quite sure. And guitarist Sylvian, and of course singer David Johansson. Now, the group recorded 2 landmark albums and wittily invented the thing that we now call punk rock, and generally lived up to their slogan, "Too much, too soon." Now, Barbara also wrote the foreword and epilogue to Arthur's book, I, Doll, Life and Death of the New York Dolls, which covers in detail the first 16 months of the Dolls' time on Earth, from Kane's first meeting with Thunders to to I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. Merca's tragic death in London. And Barbara, you have to chastise me roundly for mispronouncing his name. Of course, anybody who listens to this show knows how good I am with pronouncing certain last names. And of course, and then later on in the program, we'll bring Peter Robbins in, who Peter is the brother of the late singer Helen Wheels, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. So let me introduce to everyone Barbara Kane.
Hi,
Barbara,
everybody.
welcome to the show. It's so good. It's so good to talk to you here. I mean, we've known each other for ages, and you and Arthur used to come to my UFO conferences when we did them out in Palm Springs and in Phoenix. And I was always tickled pink because here I had been a fan of the Dolls and sat in the first row at Max's Kansas City or the Mercer Arts Center before it went down. I mean, literally, collapsed. Luckily, nobody was inside at the time. But before we get into the UFOs and your own experiences, how did the Dolls first get together? What's the story on that? Was it like 1971 or 70?
It was 1971, and Arthur had been looking to start his dream band for quite a while. He went overseas. He lived in Holland, Amsterdam for a while. He went to London. He didn't find anybody. So he came back to New York, and his dad worked for the telephone company, so Arthur became, a telephone guy. He'd go collect all the money from the telephone booths and pocket most of it.
Well, somebody had to pay for those. Somebody had to pay for those bottles of VAT 69 and Night Train and all that. What the heck?
Well, I don't think it was. He was a blackberry brandy dude.
So was Alice Cooper. I guess that was the big
Arthur
drink
and
that was
Alice
going
got
on.
along very well. Arthur and Alice were friends, and so Arthur was very good friends with Glenn Buxton. But to continue on, so he was trudging around in the snow and the heat, looking for these wild players to play with, and he kept seeing this one guy around the rock scene at Undine, or at Max's, or in the West Village, and that's when he decided to cross the street in the West Village on Bleecker, and walked over to this guy with this outrageous hair that looked like it was standing up with sticks behind it or something, and he says, "Hey, you want to start a rock band?" And the guy says back to him, "Yeah, sure." So Arthur Kane's first encounter with Johnny Thunders, and those were the first words they spoke to each other, which just tears my heart up. I think it's so cool. So Arthur played guitar at the time, and John played bass, and they decided that each one was a crappy player, so they exchanged instruments, and Arthur played bass, and John played guitar then. It was Billy Murcia that was the first drummer, and Sylvain, okay, get that right. But that was a band, and they called it Actress. And there were four of them. Then then they started the New York Dolls. They decided they needed like an actual lead singer to fulfill the band thing. And it was another guy playing with him too at the time, but they got rid of him. And they found David Johansen, and he was a great lyricist and a crazy singer, just wild, very
kind of in the style of Iggy Pop and pretty far out there.
He was a rhythm and blues guy. He was more bluesy, and snappy. I love Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding. These are my influences for singing, and I think David is kind of like more like that genre, very Motown. And they loved all the girl bands too. Well, who didn't?
Oh, me
So,
too. I was a big fan
yeah,
of that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Still
so,
am. Whatever band, Lita Ford, I don't know, whatever bands are still around. They're kind of hard
well,
pressed here in New York to find anywhere to go, even. Yeah.
yeah. Well, out here, it's still a pretty wild music scene going on. But anyway, so they started rehearsing at this place called Rusty Beanie's in the Upper West Side, and Rusty used to lock them in to the rehearsal studio so that no one could get out and steal his equipment. So they would go in there with no heat in the middle of winter, freezing their asses off with their booze, basically, to keep them warm. So that's how the New York Dolls started. And by the way, it's Arthur's bass playing that tore down the Mercer Art Center.
Well, now the Mercer Art Center, for people who weren't there, that probably would be 99.99% of the world.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pretty sleazy place in the lower east, west side, I think. Well, it was kind of on the borderline there of
it was on the border.
West
It was in the
Broadway.
middle.
Yeah. And it was connected to a really sinful after hours club. I can't remember the name of it, but that was around the corner, and I don't know.
Club 82.
And then we woke up. I can't remember what it was, but it collapsed, and then there were only a few places to play. There was the Coventry, of course, in Long Island City, and I was trying to think of this other place on
Club 82. Club 82.
Club 82. Yeah, and then there was another place on Bleecker Street. Don Hill's uncle, I believe it was. I can't think of the name of the play. Yeah, he had a big, they were uptown where the Dolls used to play when they were up on 72nd Street, and then he opened a place downtown and close to uptown. Anyway, so it was a grand old time. In fact, I had an office in the same building that the Dolls management company was in, Lieber and Krebs. And so I saw the band coming and going, and then of course years later it turned out that Arthur had an interest in UFOs, and you, Barbara, and Arthur would come to my conferences along with your white wolf pet that you had. What was it, Tanya? Is it
Majestic Montaña Tantan, Spirit of the Little Mountains, and she
beautiful,
birthed 9
beautiful
white
pet,
wolf cubs.
beautiful.
I had 9 white wolves from her.
Beautiful animal. Anyway, let's
wolves
get into
and UFOs go together. Wolves and UFOs.
Well, let's find out how they go together. Now, what kind of got Arthur interested in UFOs when he was here in New York? I don't remember we ever had a discussion on the
No, it was
topic.
me. Yeah, it was
me.
It
was you. Okay. All right. How did that come?
Yeah. Well, my story is long and extensive.
That's right. We got some time. Yeah.
I was a medium right from the get-go. I'm a twin, and he's a boy. I'm a girl. I'm extremely, I guess you would call, psychic. I'm an empath. I hear things. I hear audio and visual, and spirits come to me. So when I was growing up in old Bennington, Vermont, the house was built in the 1770s, and right up the street was the Bennington Battle Monument. So the house, the mansion we were in was haunted, very haunted. We were in the back end. My mom and dad had just moved up from New York City, and I would, at 4 years old, I'd be woken up in the middle of the night just woken up out of my sleep, and there would be a woman and a child standing over me. And I was in a state of consciousness that was other than. And they took me by the hand. I would walk around the upstairs with them. We would go up into the attic. We would come back down. And my mother would find me. She'd hear the creaking of the floors. And she would find me at the top of the stairs in a trance. And she'd be calling my name, and I did not come out of it. So she would come up the stairs and gently take me back to bed. And she didn't really speak much about it in the morning, except that she found my pillow in the bathtub and my blanket in the attic and things like that. One night, several years later, after going through this for like 2 years, I woke up with holding a very cold hand, and a child was crying. And but there was no mom there. So I, in my own innocence, however, I was told later what I was doing. My spirit, it was my spirit, that it was my spirit's journey to do what I was doing with these two spirits. And I don't know, but I comforted the child, and through the night and in the very wee hours of the morning, the child let go and stopped crying, and there was nothing there. And I just kind of, as my little spirit did, and I rolled over and went to sleep. And what I was told later by my spiritual mother, Jean Poole, was that my job, so to speak, was to take those souls, work with them, and then release them to go on to their path, because they were trapped. They were trapped from the Revolutionary War days, where they were murdered.
Wow.
So that was the beginning of my journey. Now, until the age of 7, we're all very psychic, some more than others. And then once we get into that school system and all the crap starts coming in, we lose it. I never really lost it. There's some other really harsh details to my life when I was a teenager. And I prayed to come out of that and for these people to stop hunting me. And a UFO appeared through my window one evening, early evening, when the sun was going down. But the next time I started having these experiences was when I left the group Image, the rock band. Well, yeah, I don't know. The group Image, which was a rock band in New York. But we would see ships up at Millbrook. There was a place where they landed and took off. And, I know it was Tim's place, Leary's place, but people weren't high all the time. These guys were they were visiting the property. They were there. And anyway, we saw several up there. But when I left New York and went to Tucson, Arizona, I went at the time when 9 full moon ceremonies were starting with whom I call my spiritual mother. And she took us all to the top of Mount Lemmon in Tucson, and we did the first of the 9 full moon ceremonies. And these ceremonies was when Buddha appears to the Tibetan monks, the lamas, certain ones. They go to the sacred valley, which is in the shape of a triangle, and the Buddha appears for 8 minutes. The numerology fixes in with everything, and delivers a message for the next 9 years for this planet, and how they should direct their energy and their meditation and the sound and etc. We were on the top of Mount Lemmon, which was the exact opposite of this sacred valley in Tibet. So when Buddha appeared to them, a triangular-shaped UFO appeared over us. And we did the sacred water ceremony that the lamas did over there. And we said the great invocation from the point of light within the mind of God, light stream forth into the minds of men, let the Christ consciousness come to earth, etc.
Now, how big was this craft, and how many people actually witnessed this?
150 people were there. The craft was fairly large. It was above us, but not too close. It wasn't like, oh my God, I can see the underlights. It was up. It was a burnt orange kind of color, flaming color, and it was a direct triangular, each side in perfect balance with the other, and we were shown. We were energized. That's all I can say. It energized us. Energized. It threw energy into us, and because we are basically all energy, light, and electromagnetic light and water. We do have some type of gyroscope thing creating whirring inside of us, and we were energized. It was turned on.
Now did you ever receive any communication as to who might be occupying these craft?
Well, these were in direct line with Buddha. You see, these are under Buddha's umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
That is a 1,000-petaled lotus. That is the astral plane. So you could take a gander as to who that could be. It's not Corton and his group. It's not the Galactic Command.
Yeah.
It's the ones that work directly with Buddha. There's so many entities out there. I mean, we have the Zetas, the Arcturian, the Andromedan, the Tiberians, the Iargans, and they're all here and there, and but Buddha has his own group, which, that's a good. But
no, I have to admit that that's the first I've heard of that connection. Yes.
Yeah.
So okay. Now, what was that the only group that you had made contact with?
Well, Tim, before Barbara answers this question, we need to get ready and go to our bottom of the hour break. So let's go ahead and do that. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Barbara Kane, and we'll also bring Peter Robbins into the show. So stay tuned for more on Exploring the Bizarre.
And I'm tuning up my guitar right now.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, and welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight we are talking with Barbara Kane, and now we are bringing in Peter Robbins into the conversation. Peter, how you doing tonight?
Good. Yourself, Tim?
Yeah, I'm doing very well, thank you. It's November 1st, so I'm kind of depressed because October's over with now. As everyone knows, October and Halloween, that's my Christmas. So
yeah, it's my sister's favorite holiday.
Yeah.
Everybody that listens to this show,
I think so. How could it not be?
That's right. So, Tim, where do you want to go now? Do you
let's get Peter in on the conversation here, and talk a little bit about Peter and Helen growing up together. Was that on Long Island, Peter?
Well, we were born in Queens, started to grow up there, and then our parents got this idea in their mind to follow the American dream, moved us out of the city to a really very special little village about 30 miles east of the city, and that's where we came of age and where we had our UFO sighting, and Helen had her first experience, or that I'm aware of.
And where was that, Peter?
A village called Rockville Center in Nassau County. And you know the story, of course, very well. And I've certainly told it plenty of times.
Tonight. Well, you're going to tell it again tonight for.
You got to pay me extra for that if I'm going to tell it again tonight. All right, all right. I know it's good, right?
Well, let's get a little bit of background about Helen, because we're doing rock and roll, and she was the queen of punk rock who performed at CBGBs and the other venues that would have been available to her in and around Manhattan, but nationally as well. And she did do a couple of albums. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your sister, and let's take it from there.
Yeah, as far as the connection to the wonderful world of punk and the music scene, Helen really was a Renaissance woman. And of all of the performers who came out of CB's and the Cat Club and Max's and all those other great venues, I'm obviously biased, but I think she was the most talented who never landed that first big contract that, got her noticed internationally. But she knew everybody, worked with everybody, opened for almost everybody, and in a few cases, they opened for her. Right before punk exploded in New York, going back to 1974-75, which was about the time that Helen and I first saw Arthur at Max's with the Dolls, where we used to go sometimes. And Helen at that time was very seriously involved in her poetry. I still have hundreds of pages that I've never fully gone through that I continue to archive. Her boyfriend at the time, and actually 2 other times over the next 30 years, bless his heart, was Albert Bouchard, legendary drummer for the Blue Oyster Cult, and still one of my closest friends. And Helen was living a classic starving bohemian life. She had a 5-floor walk-up on East 6th Street. Was a graduate of the French Fashion Institute, and as well as had a degree in English literature, which she really wasn't crazy about advertising like a lot of artists who are really recreating themselves or creating a new being in New York. I think sometimes she wanted people to think she had grown up, in an alleyway in New York and was never really born, just kind of hatched and got out there. We roared through the 60s together, that's for certain. But she was a marvelous poet, and she was making a good part of a living, making one-of-a-kind leathers and great outfits for rockers. I know at that time she was doing some stuff for, certainly the Blue Oyster Cult. And Albert basically said, I'm going to take some of your poems, present them to the band. And, we all get a vote on this, and I'll put them to music. And if it's a go, maybe you'll get something on the record. And at the time, they were doing one of their most legendary albums, Agents of Fortune, which I ended up with gold and platinum records for as well, for what I call art design intervention. CBS, Columbia Records, basically threw up their hands at a certain point, trying to work everything out with the guys in the band and Lynn Curley, the wonderful painter who was doing the cover, and essentially sent me in to fine tune. So I still have our 5 records up on the wall behind me. But
I'm just trying to think for people that might not be familiar with the band. Probably their biggest, 2 of their biggest hit would be Godzilla and yes. Don't Fear the Reaper.
Don't Fear the Reaper, yes. That was certainly the most commercially successful song. But Cult
And
fans are hardcore.
Helen wrote a couple that, well, you were just starting to say, that are on their album.
Well, exactly. She got the songs on the album. The album went platinum, gold, then it went platinum. And the next thing she knew, she was a professional songwriter and making good money, and then decided to follow a bigger dream. When we were kids, I was always the more out there one. In fact, thinking back to her now, right before the 60s exploded in our faces, Helen was the much more academic, a real whiz in science. I had thought she was going to become a marine biologist, which shows how the 60s can affect people. And she she didn't become a marine biologist, but she just I was the one who was a singer into the school plays, but she decided that she really wanted to sing. And all of a sudden, it's 1976. This whole punk thing is coming in. She is making money enough that she can actually pay musicians a stipend. An amazing thing for a startup band.
Oh my God, that
Yeah.
is incredible. Yeah.
Yep. And she would pay them for rehearsals for years. And she's always
Oh Jesus,
extremely generous with all of the guys that she worked with over the years, and began the first incarnation of the Helen Wheels Band. And they started to get the dates and the gigs. They had the right look, and she was opening for Iggy and the Talking Heads, and Blondie, and my gosh, lesser known, the SFs, Tish and Snooki's wonderful band.
Oh
I'm
yes,
not
yeah,
allowed,
oh yes. Uh-huh.
we can't say the name
Yeah.
on radio, but they're still kicking
Well,
ass.
you can
I
on this channel.
and she opened for Arthur's band, the Corpse Grinders.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, all the wonderful bands. My first feeling when she started to tell me about these groups, a little bit older, I grew up with Motown, soul, all the classics, but I was into heavy metal. I mean, I was worked as a photographer for the Blue Oyster Cult on and off for years, traveled with them a bit. I could hang out with the best of them. But this whole punk thing, that moment where you think, oh my God, I sound like my parents. It's just a lot of noise. So she drags me to CBGB's on a night where this band from Queens is playing, these bunch of straight-faced skinny geeks with long hair, called the Ramones. And the club was like 175 at the top, maximum fire limit. So you always got to see, bands with a very small venue. And I I got it. I totally got it. What I had missed was the incredible deadpan humor, the kind of insane vaudeville that went hand in hand with the real angst. And I was a fan from then on. And in fact, I had a major crush on Debbie Harry, like everybody else on the planet. But I think it was my second UFO talk. Tim, do you remember, Beckley, on East 23rd Street, kind of opposite Madison Square Park, and this is going back, the place probably closed 25 or 30 years ago, an independent bookstore. It was just a great hole in the wall. And upstairs, they had a rent-a-hall. Maybe it seated 60 people. And one way or another, I don't know, some months after I gave my first talk, which I'm always very proud to say was also Bud Hopkins' first talk. We spoke on the same stage at the School of Visual Arts where I was teaching at the time. And I don't know how I got the hall, but I was there and people were starting to drift in. And Debbie and Chris Stein come in and they sit front row center. I thought I was going to pass out. I mean, she was so pretty. She's just gorgeous. And I think she knew I was Helen's brother. They were, certainly had a passing acquaintance. And I was just one of many faces that, were bobbing and weaving up there by the amp stacks. But she just beamed at me. And it was my favorite UFO gig of all time as a result, of course. And My sister was a very, very disciplined musician. She was a wonderful songwriter, and her work process was extremely intense. When she passed, it took me a while to begin to get things together, but I have now notebook after notebook, with plastic sleeves with different drafts of songs that either went on to become well known in that genre or didn't. But you can see what she poured into those works of art, and she was also more fun than anybody I ever knew. Helen went through some real tragedies in her life, but she could clown around with the best of them. And you remember some of our parties. You were
Oh
also
yes.
one of her very favorite ufologists because you could be such a goofball. I
Yes,
remember
indeed.
we had a,
I have been known. I have been known as
yeah,
a, a,
and
a
at a
goofball.
time
Wasn't
when you
that
and
the
I were,
drug of choice at the time? Weren't they
yeah, well, I
goofballs?
was going to say, at a time when you and I were younger and crazier and, not into taking such good care of ourselves as we do today. And
Ah,
what was it? Some people treat their bodies like temples. I think it's
yeah.
fair to say that in our
Uh,
time, we treated ours like Coney Island. And there were those times, in those ratty little dressing rooms where illegal substances did
Mm,
pass. And Yahoo,
mm.
we just really had a wonderful time. But I remember a
oh,
party that we gave at the apartment that we had on West 57th Street, that monster
yes.
apartment. It was so big for a city place. And it was really rocking by the time that you got there. And I opened the door, and Helen was behind me. You had a big smile on your
Uh,
face. Obviously, you had shades on, but they had a
uh,
little LED display with little red lights going on back and forth across the
uh,
top of them. And we thought that was about the cleverest thing we had ever seen in our lives.
well,
We talked about that
I really
right at
got
the
into
beginning
this
of
the glam rock thing. Now I could never wear the high platform shoes. I could hardly
no,
walk
no,
in
no.
sneakers to
That was never my thing. No,
be
I
honest with you. But that was my favorite time, and I was promoting some of the bands and getting them little gigs and doing what I could to see that the public knew about them, and it was a hard a climb uphill, especially for the glam bands. Outside of the Dolls and Kiss, which were not really glam, they were hardcore rock if you ever could get there. Most of the other glam or glitter bands had a hard time making a dent. Now, people came along like Edgar Winter, who was a friend of mine for a while. I mean, we
yeah.
went to his place over the weekends and so forth. And they took on the persona of glitter. The Frankenstein
Yeah.
album, he's all glammed out,
Yeah.
but he hated that. He absolutely hated that. He wanted to be a blues musician with his brother Johnny,
Of
and
course.
they got him in the glam drag, and with the rhinestones and the whole bit, But that was a great period, and then a punk came along and
Yeah.
seemed to drive back the glitter and the glam, and
Yeah.
I wasn't quite as much into that, but I did like certainly did like the Ramones and a few of the other bands,
Oh,
the
yeah.
Dictators, if you remember Dick Manitoba, and
In fact,
yeah,
handsome Dick Manitoba, who still has his bar down on the Lower
that's
East Side,
correct.
he was the guy who gave Helen her name. He
Oh,
recognized
I
in
was going to
her
ask you
4 foot
about this. I was going
elevenness
to ask you about
a
this.
pun,
Hmm.
and that she was hell on wheels. And without handsome Dick, and I still stay in touch with some of the dictators.
Yep.
But yeah, he was important to us. And I'm thinking, I see we're about 10 minutes before the hour. If you let me just
Yes.
roll for a bit, I'm going to give you two quick bookend stories
Okay.
relative to Helen.
Roll, Peter. Roll. Yeah.
Okay. I had lived on West 47th Street in an apartment that Helen had lived in, and then she moved to 57th. I took that one. And one Monday night, I'm waiting on First Avenue, Second Avenue to get the bus down to the School of Visual Arts where I taught on Monday nights. And I heard a couple of popping sounds coming from down the block on 48th Street. Didn't think much of it. Came home that night, turned on the 9 o'clock, the 11 o'clock news. I had heard the gunshots when Big Paul Castellano was murdered, the Godfather. and had actually seen these three guys walk by me at the bus station. They were memorable because they all wore kind of Russian fur hats. They all had glasses and facial hair and trench coats. Anyway, I thought for about a millionth of a second, I need to call the police and tell them no, I don't think so. Anyway, years later, Helen's playing a small gig in Westchester. At this point, I'm her road manager. And it's a tiny club where most of the people are just talking to each other at the bar. They finish their set, like a 3-inch riser off the floor, fully lit. And the dressing room is mostly where they keep junky stuff from their kitchen. And everybody's doing their best to get changed and things. They're striking the set. We have a security guy, a big, sweet, tough, very, very respectful Italian-American kid who refers to Helen as Miss Wheels. And he knocks on the door, Miss Wheels, and he looks a bit anxious. He says, there is somebody that would like to see your sister. Well, she's getting, but I really hope that you will appreciate that this is somebody that I would like you. Okay, Helen gives him a signal, okay. And this guy walks in, maybe about 5'4", built like a refrigerator, not making good eye contact. Maybe he's in his early 20s. He's got a very busty girl on each arm. And he congratulates Helen very formally on her set and says, we would like you to play some more songs. Helen explains to him with great apologies that the set is being struck. Our stuff's going out to the van and the next band's getting ready to play and just can't do it. And he looks at her like he didn't really understand the English language and said, no, I really would like you to play some more songs for us. Helen once again explains that this is not going to happen and then looks at me like, you handle it. And I step in and explain how much she'd like. And then he gets a little bit in my face and reaches into his pocket and pulls out a major wad of cash and just starts peeling off $100 bills. How much would you like for a song? $100, $200, $300. We would like you to keep playing for us. Now it's not funny. And again, he's not making eye contact. He's kind of looking at my eyebrow or my nose, but not good on the eye thing. And one thing leads to another. He finally says, all right, I understand. Then he says, does your sister play for private dates, for gigs? Helen looks at me and shrugs her shoulders. Yes, sure. What do you have in mind? To play at a club. Okay, where is the club? It is in the Bronx. What is the name of the club? It does not have a name. It is a private club. Mm-hmm. And where? And he gives me a very crazy address in the Bronx. And he says, here's my phone number. Give me a call and we'll work out the details. I will pay you $1,000 or more if you like. Helen smiles, nods. Okay, when I call this number, who do I ask for? And he looks at me. Finally looks at my eyes. He says, I do not use my name with people I don't know, but my name is Paul Castellano. And I think to myself, I heard the guns when your dad got shot by John Gotti and Sammy the Bull Gravano. But I thought, I'm not going to bring that up. And all of a sudden, I was obligated to call the son of the dead godfather to set up a date for my sister to perform on the Wednesday following. I couldn't stop thinking about it and whether or not any of the band would ever be seen again after that, myself included. And we're rolling into like 8 o'clock at night when I'm going to make that call. And I realize I can't not do it. He probably won't hunt me down and kill me, but, he was very coked up is really what was going on. And I made the call. I let it ring 10 times, not an answer. I was delighted, hung it up and thought, oh, God, I'm dyslexic. I could have easily dialed the wrong number. And I dialed again. No answer. Didn't do the gig. True story. You can talk now.
Okay.
We did have some fun.
Yeah.
Well, we all survived. that era, except for some of the people that you have mentioned
Yeah.
in your last little story there. But
Mm,
we need. Let us get into the UFO experience. I know you don't have that much time in this segment, but we'll continue it on. Why don't you set the stage for what the hell happened to you, the two of you,
yeah.
brother and sister, back in the time, and when was the time?
And you have about 3 minutes to set this stage before our
Hmm.
break there, Peter.
Very good.
That's long enough
Very
for
good.
Peter to take a breath.
Okay. A missing time experience is about to happen then. We were kids growing up on Long Island. It was the early 60s, a beautiful June late morning. Not a cloud in the sky, as pretty a street in a little community as you could want. On one of those periods of time where nobody was around, no other kids were playing, the good humor truck wasn't there, nobody was mowing their lawn. It was just us goofing around on the front lawn and not a cloud in the sky. And I caught some movement out of my right peripheral vision and looked up in time to see 5 silvery white disc shaped objects, each like a dinner plate, but tipped like elliptical, coming in at a very high rate of speed and simply stopping over the neighbor's house in a very precise V, as in Victor, type formation. I either said Helen or look. Years later, when the memory returned, I underwent 3 different hypnotic regressions with 3 different individuals, 2 of them who you knew, Tim, and it confirmed my memory. But at that moment, there they were, and standing stock still. They were not shiny like stainless steel, more like brushed aluminum, and they were close enough that we could make out regular detailing around the edge of each that years later, reflecting back on it, we could only read like windows on an airliner at an appreciable distance.
All right, Peter, let me hold you at that because we
Yep,
have to go
perfect.
to our top of the hour break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Barbara Kane, Peter Robbins, Tim Beckley, and myself on Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight we are talking to Barbara Kane, who is the wife of the late author Killer Kane, and Peter Robbins, who his sister was Helen Wheels. And Peter, let's continue with the story that you were telling us before I had to so rudely interrupt you. But when you left off, you were giving us some detail that you could see, I guess, around the edge of these UFOs that had presented themselves above you when you and Helen were kids.
Yeah. It was a subject we never talked about. We both grew up fairly innocently. It was a very different time. I think we were very fortunate as kids to have the childhood we did. I know nothing had prepared me for this other than, goofy B movies that I'd see at our local movie theater on Saturday sometimes. It just wasn't a subject that I thought about or really was that interested in. But all of a sudden, there they were. And the one thing that I did understand intuitively or culturally about this phenomena was that it had ridicule attached to it. And if what we were seeing was what I thought we were seeing, then everything that I thought I knew was now open to question. And we looked and looked and looked, didn't say a word to each other. They hung there by my best count and hers for several minutes, which was forever, especially in kid time. And I remember going through a reaction, Tim, that as an investigative writer specializing in this subject for many years, I've documented, I'm sure several hundred times. I call it the checklist reaction. And it's simply you're minding your own business, you look up and you see something or things that have the potential to change your life, and your mind rattles off what they are not. Planes, blimps, balloons, dirigibles, helicopters, kites, reflections from the ground, strange shaped clouds. And then I kind of hit the wall. I just felt stuck with something I didn't want to know. And at a certain point, my anxiety was so peaked that I went to run into the house to tell her mom. And almost immediately felt as though I were running through molasses. Everything slowed down tremendously. There was absolutely no fear. It was simply just fascinating. And so much so that I really stopped thinking about these things in the sky, which is ridiculous, and just remarked to myself on what an extraordinary moment this was for me, and passed out or was knocked out. When I awoke on the ground there, nobody was around. They were gone. I went into the house, walked up the stairs. My intuition was Helen was in a room. She was. But looking out the back window, private moment, I went into the kitchen and told my mom what we had seen. And she looked at me very seriously. Many years later, when we talked about it, she didn't remember that moment. But looking back on it, to not feel compelled to tell your kid at a moment like this that, oh, honey, you just thought they looked like that, or blah, 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 either because you're anxious or you think the kid will be. But anyway, Helen asked me that afternoon if I wanted to talk about it. And I made it clear to her that I did not. And the days, the weeks, the months, the years slipped by. I talked myself out of it fairly quickly. And it became my repressed memory from childhood. If I have others, I don't remember them. And years later, in my 20s, living in Chinatown, following my dream of being a painter, had a nice loft down there. I was teaching at Visual Arts, working on the old buildings in Soho during the day, helping turn them over into the galleries and lofts that they became. And the memory returned with a vengeance. I could spend a lot of time telling you why I think it did happen right then and there, but the fact is it did. And it shook me up so badly, I thought I must be going crazy. How can you forget something like that? And at the time, Helen lived again on East 6th Street, so a mile or so north of me. I called her, asked her if this was a good time to speak, was very careful not to put words in her mouth and tell her what I remembered, but to say I thought it was important, childhood memory, wanted to know what she remembered, and I simply set the scene, the weather, where we were standing, about the time of day, and she cut me off and started to laugh and like it was yesterday and said, no, I know what you're talking about, and told me. And with a very small permutation, she remembered what I remembered and then said, but there's more, and I don't know if you're going to like it. And that was the life changer for me. That's when she began to tell me about realizing I had kind of run off, saw me disappear. Intuition was going to tell mom, and that all of a sudden she saw a beam of light shoot out of one of these things, blue, and that she looked, turned around, and saw me in it. And even though she was 12 years old, she knew you can't see that. You can't see a beam of light during the day, but that's what she remembered. I went down, and she went up. Also, like me, before I passed out or was knocked out, no anxiety whatsoever, just fascinated to see our house get smaller, the roof of the house for the first and last time, and then going back more than 40 years now since we talked about this, at a time when the abduction phenomena really was hardly even a blip on the radar. The Betty and Barney Hill case was known, but not in 60, it didn't break until 65, and our event had happened before that, even though it happened in 61, and described to me fragments of abduction-related memories that now I'm sure I've heard several hundred times, some of it word for word. But at the time, this twisted my head around completely. I became obsessed with the subject. The one thing I knew in my heart was that my sister was not lying. And if she was, what? Oh, we had just seen 5 UFOs with windows on them, but now she's making something up? Please. Within a year, I met Bud Hopkins, who was still 5 years away from writing his first book. And here I am talking to you guys.
No, he was 5 years away from writing his first book. You met him through your mutual interest in art?
I met Bud because his very first case, about which he wrote his very first
Obarski.
article.
Obarski.
That's it, George Obarski,
Yes.
who
Yes,
appeared with us on the stage of the School of Visual Arts in 77, I think, when we spoke there together. But he had just published this article, and it was in, you may remember, the Village Voice of all papers. I mean,
of all places. And then I think
Yeah.
Cosmopolitan picked it up later on or something.
I think
like
you're
that.
right. I think you're right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Wow.
And I walked by a newsstand.
I got a memory for this stuff, but where are my keys?
God, yeah.
That's what
I know, right? Exactly. I read the article. It was a brilliantly written article. I mean, this guy was a natural. And it mentioned that he was a painter. And I thought, New York art world is small. I had seen, late period abstract expressionist Bud Hopkins in some group show a few years before. Went to the New York City phone book. Of course, there's only one Bud Hopkins, 2 Ds, and I cold called him. This is 1976. He picks up the phone. Hi, you don't know me, blah, blah, blah. I'm a painter too, teach at visual arts. Had this experience with my sister. Well, he listened. And the first question was, tell me about your artwork. I thought, uh-oh. He was late period abstract expressionist. I was hardcore minimalist conceptualist. He was not impressed. But he was very curious about Helen and invited me over to have coffee a few days later. And it's funny, Tim. I remember sitting at that kitchen table in his building, and the building doesn't exist anymore. It's now been replaced by a very trendy apartment house on West 16th Street. And thinking, this is cool. And what a great little, loft setup this is. Not having any awareness that over the next 35 years, I was going to have hundreds of cups of coffee at that table and more than a shot of scotch.
Yeah. Well, okay. Now, what did Helen? Did she have any recollection about being inside the ship? I mean, could she discuss the interior to you, or whether there were occupants on board?
Yes. Her memories that I remember, and I have audio cassette of Pete Mazzola, our old friend, who was the first to do a regression with her. Pete was a tough, no-nonsense New York City police detective and also a crack UFO investigator, the first person I knew to do hypnotic regression to recover memories from people who had had experiences or abductions, and then worked with Bud for some years. And she remembered going up, number one. Her hair was fairly long, and I will never forget her description of it just blowing in the wind, and thinking to myself, how could you not be scared? But that's one of the things about this phenomena. Normal patterns do not fit. She then remembered looking up, of course, and seeing the bottoms of these things get larger and larger and larger, and somehow going into the bottom of one. And the next thing she remembered, and I have to stress here again, all without a basic threat of anxiety. And, in a rational situation, you'd be freaking the hell out like, some screamer in a science fiction movie. But being walked through a curved metal hall by a number of small beings that were archetypical grays, but the word gray did not exist. And her description, she said she quoted herself at 12 years old and described them as little doctors with big heads and big black eyes that spoke to her in her head. And then there was one very tall one that she knew was the leader. The next thing she remembered was being on the metal table, naked, with all of these little beings clustered around her and the big one, and hearing a specific number of phrases in her head. The ones that I remember off the cuff are, we've seen you before, we'll see you again, you're special, we love you, we won't hurt you, where they created some complexity, because Helen was not a fan of theirs, was when she remembered hearing, we love you, we won't hurt you. In her head, she was experiencing some pain from whatever they were doing. And at a certain point, she didn't remember being returned, but she was simply back on the lawn, and I was lying there. And had you driven by in a car, my mom had a rock garden, the way that everything was banked, you could have driven by without seeing me laying flat by the front door. And she knew intuitively I was okay and that I was going to come out of my faint soon. And she said, I just stepped over you and went upstairs to my room to just, think. And again, I got up. And when, we're talking about this, and at a certain point, my mind's completely blown. It was one thing to have this memory confirmed, but this was, just too much for me. And I just sort of blurted out at a certain point, why haven't we ever talked about this? And she reminded me. She said, do you remember that afternoon when I came up to you? And I said, do you want to talk about this? And you looked at me and you said, very, very seriously, no. And you walked away. You're my brother. I love you. I respect you. And you made your feelings clear. And the next thing, here we are 14 years later, 14 plus. And
now, Peter, let me ask you, when did she get the tattoo?
This would have been when we were first talking about it in 75, right on the cusp of her punk career beginning. She was a poet at the time. Was
that her first tattoo?
That's right. The little flying saucer down there, flying out. And she did that about 6 months later. So it was probably 1976 already. And this was not a time when everybody and their brother and their sister and their mom was getting tattoos. As my parents said, sailors, criminals, and nice Jewish girls from Long Island don't get tattoos.
Well, Arthur and I got tattoos, and mine was a UFO, but also kind of a shape in the Eye of Horus as well.
There you
go. And Arthur and I got our tattoos in 1974 together.
Oh.
And Helen and I, we met Arthur. Arthur and I met Helen, and one of our first discussions was about UFOs.
I love it. Well, she was very outspoken about it for the rest of her life, and never. Yeah. She could have cared less what anybody ever thought about it.
And some of the guys in the band, I know I even talked to a couple of the boys in Blue Oyster Cult. They said, "Well, we don't understand it, but we'll go along with it." And
it's like, who cares? We experienced it. We know we had that experience. And for some reason, when you go through that kind of experience, it does make you, you're humbled by it. You have humility. But there's no doubt something bigger and greater in the whole bit. Yeah. But you also know that you have something that happened to you that's kind of special, and you really don't fit in. You're like a square peg in a round circle. You just don't fit in. Yep. Period. And, I was told I was nuts for years. I went around. I called my mother. Oh, I saw a UFO just now. Blah 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 from Arizona. She goes, they thought I was certified.
Well, of course, that's what people said. The fact is, you've nailed it, though. You feel special. And at a certain point, I said to my sister, so you're telling me that you've never forgotten this. Every day you've had this in your thoughts one time or another, usually every day, as you say, but you've never brought it up. What do you think when you think about what happened to you? And she's quiet for a minute, and she said, it reminds me that I'm special. And I thought, you know what? Way to go. You are. But what a good way to deal with something that for somebody else, it would have bedeviled them or, turned them into a basket case or something. But I had to admire that.
It was totally unacceptable. Yeah. So that's why Helen and I got along.
I love it.
We knew. And Arthur never believed me either. He thought I was freaking nuts,
Well, why didn't you
he was
during the break that we just had, you mentioned, Barbara, that you had a missing time experience that included Arthur. Now, I've always felt, of course, like I say, I knew, Arthur, and you guys used to come to my conferences, but I feel particularly close because Arthur did pass away on my birthday. He had invited me, as you know, to the one of the reunion shows that they were doing here in Long Island. Well, it was Randall's Island. Not Rikers Island,
yeah.
Randall's Island.
Rikers Island.
And I had wondered, why I hadn't heard from him to tell me what gate or tower I should go to pick up my backstage, pass. The band, the Dolls, had gotten together after, I don't know, 30 years, Barbara? Was it 30 years? Yeah, 30 years. And Morrissey, the British musician, was responsible for putting together this tour. Anyway, I didn't hear from Arthur, but I got a call at about 2 o'clock in the morning from our mutual friend, the late the drummer Blue Ocean, telling me that Arthur had passed away. And of course, I remember that every day on every birthday, July 13th. I recall that. But anyway, tell us about your experience with Arthur. What happened?
Well, he never believed. So, and I kept telling him, well, this is for real, and so anyway, and I talked a lot about it to people who wanted to hear. And anyway, we had just come from my parents' house in Vermont, and we were going through New Paltz. And they speak to me. They call me when they're around. And so a voice in my head said, Barbara, look to the left by over the mountain. And I did, and there was a silver cylinder ship over the mountain. And I said, Arthur, look. And to the left, and he goes, I'm driving.
Oh.
So I said, I said, there's a UFO there. And he said, oh, come on. So I turned up the radio and looked around, and our cat, Prudence, traveled with us. She was a big white cat all the time. We used to walk around a leash and harness. Anyway, all of a sudden, I feel this, like, presence, and I look, and the freaking thing is riding alongside of us, right next to us, pacing the car. And I said, Arthur, just please look to your left. And he looks and he goes, well, he doesn't say anything. He's like, what? What? And I said, yeah, that's a UFO, Arthur. And and then everything kind of went blank, right? And he remembers driving down the road, and it was dark. I remember coming down the road, and it was dusk, not quite dark. So we do have missing time. We, from Sleepy Hollow to New Paltz, all of a sudden we were getting into Sleepy Hollow, New York State. And I'm like, I said, Arthur, what time is it? What happened? We didn't know what happened. I had never been regressed. Arthur was never regressed. I felt like by that time, I had already been through being clinically dead, out-of-body experiences, seen over 200 UFOs, blah, 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 blah. And I thought for sure I would know if they got me. You know what I'm saying? Well, I don't remember. I should probably talk to Bud Hopkins, who I've met, by the way, but I never really got into it with him. Well, at these UFO conventions that you were having, Tim.
Yes,
there were crowds of people,
mm-hmm.
And he had crowds around him, and everybody wanted Bud.
Well, now I remember you came to one there, and did we not go out to George Van Tassel's Integratron in the desert?
Did we?
Well, there's a photo. There's a photo of there's a photo of there's a photo of Arthur. There's a photo of Arthur standing in front of the dome.
Yeah, I took him there. That was in
Oh, you did?
1984.
Okay.
I took him there because I knew about George from my friend Jean Poole, my spiritual mother. She used to go to the 1954, 55, 56 conventions with Gabriel Green, who I also met in Palm Springs at one of your conventions.
Wonderful man. I always like.
All right, I need to interrupt you here because we have to go to our bottom of the hour break. So when we come back, we'll continue this conversation on Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the final segment of Exploring the Bizarre. And Tim, you during the break you made you asked an interesting question about what's the connection between rock and roll and UFOs. And Barbara, you had a pretty good answer to that. Do you want to tell us that to our audience?
Okay, you're going to ask me to do that with short-term memory loss?
Remember what you can, Barbara.
Teasing. Once again, it's electromagnetic frequencies. It's sound, and with rock and roll, it's all about the energy, the tempo, and once again, the group image, the first crazy ass rock band I was in the late 60s. We did the first Woodstock Festival. 2 years later, they did the huge one. And it was at the farm in Woodstock with about 500 people with Elephant's Memory, Aluminum Dream, blah, blah, blah. So the group image was playing, and I looked up to the sky, and there was a UFO blinking at us. So I turned around to the light show guy. I said, turn on the strobe lights, aim it to the sky, and blink it. So we blinked it. The UFO blinked back. We blinked back. I mean, there was a whole exchange of energy. The sound of the rock and roll, it went up. It changed sound. It changed level. It changed pitch. It changed consciousness. And everyone was like in this whirlwind spiral going up. And it was the UFO energy with the sound coming from rock and roll, coming from those highly charged amps. And we had amps, some of the first, these very unusual amps called ohm amps, and they were created in Canada. I can't remember a lot about them, but I do know that they had exceptional sound and vibration to it. So that was that's my connection, and that's what I feel. It's frequencies, it's energy. It's like the electromagnetic energy grids that weave around this whole planet, underwater and above, and the huge crystal that lies underneath Joshua Tree and Landers pulls that electromagnetic energy in, and that's why George Van Tassel was instructed by the Space Brothers to build the Integratron up there with the help, of course, of Howard Hughes and his money. And when I took Arthur up there, and you remember that picture of him, Tim?
Yeah.
We met.
Yeah. In fact, we'll use that in our YouTube version of
Oh,
Arthur
okay.
standing in
Yeah.
front of the dome there
Yeah.
in Landers.
And I also sent you, I think, if you didn't get the picture of the George Van Tassel sign that was on his property. We met Doris Van Tassel, his wife.
Oh yes,
George had already been lifted up. I actually went to the field where George was lifted up, and it wasn't far from his little cafe stand where he used to do his UFO
right.
meetings in
Well,
1954,
under
etc.
they met and channeled under the rock. There was actually a room
Yeah,
under there when it was
yeah,
110
yes,
degrees out in the sun. It was
yes.
evenly tempered. I think at about 70, 2 degrees all year long.
Yeah, I've been
And
there. I've been
they
to that
spoke.
rock.
Yeah, they spoke
Yeah,
in
yeah,
channeled, if you believe in that, information from the Ashtar Command. I think he was one of
yes.
the first individuals who actually claimed to have been in touch with the Ashtar and Munka from
The
Mars and these
Ashtar.
other entities
Yeah,
that sprang to life because of the early contactee movement in California during
yeah.
the late 40s and early 50s, and I guess partially into the 60s, until it was replaced by
Well,
glam rock and punk.
well, Frank Stranges was another friend, as well as Hal Wilcox. And Frank
Oh yeah.
was the one. I believe he's the one who wrote about Valiant Thor, who landed in the California desert. And went to Washington in 1952 to tell everybody, and it's kind of like where the movie came from, The Day the Earth Stood
They
Still,
are stood
because he
still,
went there.
right?
Yeah, and he went there and he tried to tell everybody, you are not alone. No more war. The fate of this planet is balanced upon humans and what you're doing here, and nobody believed him. So he came back out to California and took off from the middle of the desert. But the Californians out here that knew him believed him, of course. And Frank was one of them, and Hal, and of course George. And my friend Jean Poole, as I said, my spiritual mother, she knew him. She knew everybody, and we were so lucky to have known Gabriel Green. Some of those pictures I gave you come from Gabriel Green, Tim.
Oh yes,
Um,
he was
so
of course
speaking,
a photographer. I
yeah,
mean, that's what he had originally
yeah,
done before he got into the contactee movement, and he put together
mm,
quite a few. Well, at least one very very large conference in Reno, Nevada. That even now, Peter,
yeah.
you'll enjoy this. Uh, Chief Standing Horse was actually one of the first Native Americans to come forward to talk about traveling in UFOs. And
Hmm.
one of the craft that he said to have ridden in was shaped like an arrow.
Hmm.
Oh, those are the V-shaped crafts that they saw
Yeah, there you
over
go. Uh-huh.
Arizona
Well,
not too long ago. And
he and
David
he, ca-
Munyagi,
he
the shaman for the Hopi Indians in 1969 when I was living up there, and that was at the time of a fulfilling of a prophecy when a man would show up. This guy was from Columbus, Ohio. I can't remember his name, but he's well known
Solomon.
in the UFO
Solomon.
world to be.
Well, there was a fellow by the name of Solomon who even was in the Village Voice that had gathered like on Second Mesa or something like that, and they were having sightings at the time.
Yeah, but he came there and he said he was going to bring down the UFOs with the stone tablets. Now there's a picture of a Hopi woman coming out of a ship painted on the rocks of old Arrivie that's probably over 1,000 years old, and they've been waiting for the stone tablets to be brought back to them by the Space Brothers. So the whole tribe, Chief Dan, everybody, we were in this Hogan, and when we walked in, the air was so thick you could cut it with a cloud, a
Hmm.
knife. It was like a cloud in there, and those young white people that went there, we were a part of the fulfilling of the prophecy. In the book of Hopi, it said the young white clan would come back to Hopi and stand with a medicine man against the rest of the tribe, against a false prophet. Well, I was there for that. And David took me into his hogan while the rest of the tribe went down to the bottom mesa to stand with this guy in the early evening while he called into this carved wooden cane, C-24, this is D-28, come in, we're waiting. And of course, nobody showed up. But David was telling me in his hogan while all that was going on about UFOs and Native American people, how they're waiting for the stone tablets, all about Atlantis and the sinking of Atlantis, and how they went into the inner world, Earth, and how they came out of the Earth down in South America, and from there they walked to Central America, and that's where all the tribes, that's where the whole Americas were peopled by the red man, who are from another planet.
Well,
Yeah,
I have to ask this question to both of you. Okay, so we went through this period in the 1950s and 1960s when the vibrations of the planet seemed to be escalating. I mean, we seem to be headed in the right direction.
Yes, and
yet now there seems to be a lack of activity on as far as the Space Brothers go, and UFOs in general. Peter, would you say that? I mean, is there a turn down in activity, or am I just imagining that?
Boy, for me, that's a really challenging question, Tim. It's like saying there are more UFOs being seen in the skies because we're getting more reports of them, when in fact, and I'm speaking completely hypothetically here, more people simply may be reporting them, but it's the same number. There's always a certain amount of guesswork. What I'm more aware of is that right now, and again, this past week with the election of this ultra right-wing new president in Brazil, a country that's not only hugely important potentially in the world economy, but because of the rainforest there that can be even more decimated to speed up this process of climate change, it seems more and more in the world of human affairs, there's a contraction, that there's a lot more fear than there is openness or love or hope, and that people respond to fear. It's very real. Most people, unfortunately, are all too used to it, are better equipped to respond to it than they are to affection, which can be problematic for a lot of people. It's the human affairs right now that seem to be dominating rather than any undercurrent of naturalness or vibration, or this is really, for me, not my area. I'm such a plodding nuts and bolts pragmatist. I'm not religious. I certainly have a spiritual streak, but I as I'm listening to Barbara speak, I'm thinking, we really are in not a good place right now. And
no, we're
one
not. No, we're
wonders,
not. We're not.
Sometimes the only thing we have to work with, because it's not provided in what we know about this phenomena or breakthrough research, is really great science fiction. I'm not what I'd call a science fiction person. I've read a minimum of it, but I've read some great science fiction and obviously seen a lot of films. And, we have our avatars in this field, everybody from Jules Verne to H.G. Wells to Gene Roddenberry, and, take your pick. And they, them, all of the different thems are well embodied in Gene Roddenberry's wonderful idea that was introduced in the very beginning of the very first season of the first Star Trek, which is the only one that still really interests me nostalgically, which is the idea of once there was a federation, one of the, the prime directive, the number one rule when you're out there cruising around in the cosmos and you happen upon a civilization. And interesting how many of them are humanoid, that the one thing you don't want to do is show your cards because they won't be able to take it. And I remember
Yeah.
I didn't follow the show when it was on. I watched it in, I guess, its first generations of reruns, and I thought by then I was into Carl Jung, and Jung had written, I guess, around the First World War about meeting with an African, we'll call him a witch doctor, a tribal religious person who remembered the actual appearance of the first British coming into his village, like in the 1870s or something. And Jung had asked him the impact. He said, well, in so many words, and it's a long time remembering, here are these white people. Were they our ghosts? Were they gods? Were they devils? What were they? Wearing bright red with these bright metal buttons, carrying these thunder sticks. And when, the first one fired one and a pig died on the other side of the center of our village, essentially what he said was our dreams died. And I thought that was a brilliant idea in the fiction, that you don't want to tell them all about and show them, all of your high-tech tools. They will wither. They won't be able to stand it. And one, people, the classic, well, why don't they just show themselves? Why don't they land on the White House lawn? No.
Well, they can't.
There's a lot of reasons for that. But
one reason is that we are so contagious that they really can't be near a certain groups because their vibrational frequencies are so much higher than ours. We could infect them. Okay, we could give them a bug that would short circuit them. Okay, to put it like that. The other thing is, they really only show themselves to the humble. People that are narcissistic, know-it-alls and this and that and this and that, they're not ready for enlightenment anyway. Space Brothers basically are here for several reasons, but they also bring enlightenment. How about the beautiful garden created by the Itibi-Ryans in called Lanaslan at the tip of the Amazon jungle, where I think it meets Ecuador and Amazonia, etc. And this is where they grow fruit and vegetables from all over the universe. Okay, and what about the Galactic Command, or there is a federation? There is a huge federation, and the group of genetic scientists from Andromeda and Arcturia, the Arcturians and the Pleiades and the Lyrians from the Pleiades, etc., created us. We were created as well as everything else. It was created. This is who people call God. Okay, I mean, it's in a lot of ways, it makes a lot of sense. But to the ordinary mind, no.
Well, I think the ordinary mind today, I wonder if they're thinking about anything, lofty like we speak about here. I mean, it seems like, well, times have changed. I mean, let's face it. We sit here and we have a congenial, conversation, and we get phone calls, and people do email us from time to time. But there is less of the camaraderie today. I think, Peter, wouldn't you agree, in the field than there was before? I mean, there are very few meetings to go to.
Yes.
Correct.
There's no meetings left. Yeah.
I think that's a very sad but true commentary. In a way, what we have now is built on the kind of homemade quality, in many cases, that things used to have. Now, I don't know, it's more formal. There are certain things that are, I don't know, it was just a lot looser. You think about the evolution of film. Somebody like D.W. Griffith, granted, one of the world's most amazing racists, but somebody who helped create a medium, who made it up as he went along, contributed to people like Orson Welles. The meetings that you were talking about.
I worked for Orson Welles.
Oh, Jesus.
I was in the last movie he ever made of a
Oh, my
film
God.
producer making his last movie. Yeah, it was called The Other Side of the Wind, and he picked on me. And
Oh, for
Houston would
goodness
lean
sakes.
over and he'd go, "Young lady, Mr. Wells really likes you." I said, "He does?" I was like this quivering 20-year-old. Oh,
Well,
my God. Yeah, Orson.
if we're
Oh,
going to go off on a tangent, that's the one I want to go off on. But, talking about giant rock, for me, what it must have been like to be listening to Kehoe for the first time on Long John Neville shows back in the 50s. It was a very different reality. And now it's almost over sophisticated with the advent of the internet. So many people think they know so much, and people present themselves with a very straight face, making outrageous claims. And it goes back for me to the iconic poster that we all have in the back of our heads in a way from that very first episode of the X-Files.
Yes.
Want to believe. Most of us do. And it's all the more, how can I say, incumbent on us to check things out, not accept everything at face value, do your own homework. Belief is fine, but real information to back it up, whether it's experiential, like you're talking about, or the kind of information you can present in a court of law.
Well, I am looking forward, Peter, to this show. I guess that will be aired on the History Channel maybe this month about the career of Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
Yes. How about that?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I've heard some a criticism of it. Oh, it's not a documentary. It's been, exploited by, well, I don't think you would call the History Channel Hollywood by any means, but it's not necessarily for the purist, because some dramatization has been involved in the making of the series, but there's nothing wrong with that. What are our favorite series? A series over the years: Unsolved Mysteries, Sightings, and what was the other one? The one with Leonard Nimoy.
In Search of.
In Search of.
of.
You've got dramatization there. You got to bring it to the you can't sit there and lie about it, but you got to make it edible to the general. It's like you got to put sugar. You got to put sugar on your cornflakes. Tim, you take over the rest of the show here, because we're running down on the minutes, right?
Oh, crap.
Yeah, we're coming up at about 3 minutes before the end of the program, Tim. So perhaps we should.
Much fun.
Oh, I know it's great,
it's
but
Tina's
unfortunately,
she's got
it's ending.
Peter, I would love to chat with you off the book sometime.
Tell us where our audience can get in touch with you, Barbara, and you too, Peter.
Yeah.
Barbara, why don't you let our audience know a little bit more about where they may be able to find you? I mean, do you have a presence online or anything like that?
Well, I've kind of been living under a rock lately. I don't know if I want to be found or not. I raised wolves in the wilderness, and I'm telling you, that was so pure and so beautiful being with wolves. And I birthed them, I raised them. They were so devoted to me. And, well, at this point, the place I guess anybody can find me is on Facebook, Barbara Kane.
There you go.
And, I guess they have a web number for me. I don't know, Barbara Kane 777.
Yeah, just type it in. Those that are meant to find you will find you.
That's right. Right.
Correct. And I'm open to anybody.
Peter is probably hiding from a lot of people, but if you're not, where can people Google you, Peter? Right? Google you.
I'm not the social butterfly I used to be, I guess. Like that.
And Peter, real quick, how about you?
You can find me also on Facebook. There are many Barbara Kanes. There are quite a few Peter Robinses. I'm the one listed in Ithaca, New York, and otherwise you can go to my much in need of updating website, which is my first initial. No, actually, it's peterrobinsny.com. That's my website. Right.
I didn't know you had one.
I
My
don't
goodness.
refer to it very often. It's only about 2 years out of date right now, but there it is. And there is a very compelling article front and center. And Facebook is where I post most of what I'm going to be doing next. And for anybody that is in the Syracuse, New York area, that's my next gig. I'll be speaking there November 17th. Get the information from me on Facebook and visit beautiful Syracuse, New York.
Well, this has been a wonderful evening. It has brought back a lot of memories and a lot of good times, and I'm so happy that we set up the show. And it was glam rock versus punk rock, and I think they came out equal in everybody's eyes. So, Barbara, and Peter, good evening, and same to you, Tim. And don't forget our YouTube channel, Mr. UFO Secret Files, and this will be up there soon with lots of cool photos and cool stuff.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.